Hey guys, tonight we trudge through soggy heather, into a world of icy wind, damp wool, and the kind of silence that only happens when everyone's too cold and hungry to complain. You're standing ankle-deep in bog. Midges, swarming your face like they've been saving up all winter just for you. Behind you, the mist hides the mountains. Ahead, your path disappears into fog, so thick it might as well be soup. Cold soup. With a generous helping of sheep dung, this is medieval Scotland. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and local time. I want to know where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your feet squish through something unpleasant as you shuffle down the slope. You don't bother checking what it is you've learned that in Scotland. Ignorance is often the only comfort available. The wind cuts through your cloak like it's made of lace. You pull it tighter, though it's already soaked and smells faintly of wet goat. The path winds between stunted trees and jagged stones, each one waiting to trip you or curse you, or both, somewhere in the distance. A raven cackles. You can't tell if it's laughing at you or warning you. Either way, it's not reassuring. You pass a shepherd with a wool hood and a face carved from granite. He nods, or maybe shivers. Could be both. His sheep look miserable. You ask how the grazing is. He grunts something that sounds like, better than last year. Then coughs up a lungful of regret and peat smoke. That's probably the most optimistic thing anyone said all day. Eventually you arrive at your croftiff, you can call it that. A low stone cottage with a roof stitched together from turf, moss, and whatever didn't blow away last winter. There's no chimney. The smoke from the peat fire curls lazily up into the rafters, collecting in a thick, choking cloud. Just below ceiling height. You duck beneath it and try not to breathe too deeply. Too late. Your lungs sting. Your eyes water. Your stew tastes faintly of ash, and something you hope was a turnip. Your neighbors are equally red-eyed and soot-cheeked. One picks fleas from his collar while complaining about a boil on his leg that won't go away. Another just sits by the fire, muttering Gaelic curses and staring at the wall like it personally offended him. No one bathes today, or tomorrow, or, frankly, ever. Not unless they fall into a lock by accident. You sleep on a straw mattress in the corner, shared with at least one cousin, a toddler who kicks in her sleep, and a hen who refuses to roost anywhere else. You pull a scratchy wool blanket over your shoulders, which does almost nothing to stop the wind squeezing through the cracks in the walls. Outside, the mist presses against the cottage like a living thing. You hear hooves, but new footsteps, then silence, then hooves again. You don't look out. Looking out never helps. Mainstream historical fact. Life in medieval Scotland, especially for crofters and small farmers, was brutally hard. Most people lived in simple stone dwellings roofed with turf or thatch, heated only by open hearths burning peat. These homes had no chimneys, meaning smoke built up inside, leading to chronic respiratory problems. Many lived with their animals, both for warmth and because pens were a luxury, most couldn't afford. Malnutrition was common. So were disease and violence. The highlands were beautiful, but they rarely cared if you lived or died in them. You wake the next morning coughing, your eyes crusted, your throat raw. Breakfast is oatcakes. If you're lucky, porridge. If you're not, the porridge is bland, lumpy, and served cold because the firewood's damp. Again, you eat it anyway, because food is food, and taste is for nobility. Fringe tidbit. In parts of medieval Scotland, it was believed that if you left your fire unbanked overnight, evil spirits could sneak down and curse your hearth. That's why families would often recite protective chants while carefully burying the embers each night in ash. These were known as smoring the fire prayers. Whether they kept out witches or just made sure your cottage didn't burn down was up for debate, but no one skipped them. You head outside to relieve yourself in the designated corner of the garden, which is just a polite way of saying, the same bush as yesterday. The wind makes it a miserable experience. You stare out at the hills and try to imagine life elsewhere. Warm beds, dry bread, no midges. You sigh. The midge flies into your mouth. You gag, swallow it by accident, and count that as protein. You wake coughing again, eyes sore from the smoke, mouth dry from breathing air that tastes like boiled earth. The peat fire has burned low, leaving behind that strange, sweet ash scent that clings to your hair and skin, no matter how many times you scrub, though. Let's be honest. You haven't exactly been spoiled for washing opportunities. You're croftiff. You could call 4 stone walls and a mossy roof a home offers. 0 insulation. The wind slips through the gaps like a bored ghost and curls around your ankles while you sleep. There's no chimney here. Remember? Just a hole near the roof that pretends it's a solution. The smoke gathers above you like a ceiling made of fog and regret, occasionally dipping low enough to make your nose burn. You squint toward the fire, where your uncle is already up, poking the embers with what used to be a pitchfork and now barely qualifies as a stick. He mutters something under his breath in Gaelic, probably a curse, possibly a prayer. But there's not much difference between the two around here. He drops another sod of peat onto the fire, and the room instantly fills with thick, eye-stinging smoke. You pull your plaid tighter around your shoulders, coughing again, then crawl from your straw mat, careful not to disturb the hen that's adopted the pile of rags beside you. Today is like most days, gray, damp, and full of chores. You step outside into a wall of mist so dense, it feels like stepping into an old soup. The air smells of manure, wet grass, and the faint tang of sheep. You tread carefully over slick stones, duck under the low lintel, and feel the weight of the weather press into your bones. Inside, the walls are damp. The thatch above you sags just enough to drip on your forehead. It's not raining, but it doesn't really need to. The damp lives here permanently now, the way an in-law might. Mainstream historical fact: most dwellings in medieval Scotland were built with what was available: stone walls laid dry without mortar, roofs made of turf or thatch, sometimes weighed down with stones to stop them from flying off during high winds. Chimneys weren't common, especially in rural homes. Smoke from indoor fires accumulated inside, blackening ceilings and contributing to chronic bronchitis. eye problems, and premature death. Not exactly ideal. Feng Shui. You go about your daily task carrying water from the stream. Again. Chasing the neighbor's goat out of your plot. Again. And trying to grind oats using a quern stone that's been passed down through so many generations it's worn nearly smooth. Breakfast is porridge. Again. It tastes like sadness and gravel. You chew dutifully. Grit between your teeth. And nod at your aunt as she mutters about the devil making the oats sprout crooked. Fringe tidbit. In some Scottish folk traditions, crooked or oddly growing crops were considered signs of fairy interference or demonic meddling. To prevent this, families might hang iron implements above their doors, bury nails near the field's edge, or even whisper protective chants to the grain itself. Because obviously, the solution to agricultural problems is to serenade your food. Smoke continues to coil along the ceiling like it's searching for someone. The younger kids squint and blink, their faces smudged with soot that never quite washes off. The old dog by the hearth sneezes and burrows deeper into its blanket of rags. Everyone here has a cough. It's like a family song. Outside, the wind shifts, and the peat smoke spills out the door for a moment, granting you a few merciful lungfuls of real air. You savor it. Then it's back bitter and heavy. There's something about peat that smells ancient, like burning history, one handful at a time. The baby starts crying. Your cousin lifts her, bouncing slightly as he hums an off-key lullaby. The baby wears a tunic of roughly woven wool and nothing else. It's not out of neglect, it's just that cloth is expensive, and diapers haven't been invented yet. The rushes on the floor do double duty as padding and absorbent surface. You avoid sitting too close to the dark patches. You help prepare the midday meal, which is again oats this time, baked into cakes. They're dry, cracked, and tasteless. But they fill the belly, and that's all anyone asks for. You dunk yours in a mug of watered-down ale that tastes faintly of metal and mold. It's warm, at least. You chew slowly, watching as your uncle cuts a slice of boiled turnip with a knife that's also been used to dig out splinters, clean his nails, and last week remove a tooth. The wind picks up again and whistles through the gaps in the walls. A breeze flutters your cousin's hair while she sleeps curled against a sheepdog that might technically be part wolf. No one minds. It's warm, and warmth is currency. Later, you help your aunt repair a section of the roof where rain has made the thatch collapse. You climb onto the damp stones, slipping more than once, and stuff clumps of moss and bundled heather into the hole. Your hands are numb, your fingers stained green, and your arms ache from holding yourself upright in the wind. But by nightfall, it's done. The room inside is slightly drier. Barely. You count that as a triumph. You fall asleep again beside the fire. Your nose stuffy. Your throat raw. Your legs curled around a half-wet dog, and a cousin who kicks in his sleep. The ceiling above you glows faintly from the dying embers, every inch blackened from years of smoke that never found a way out. You wonder if there's any part of this cottage that hasn't been smoked, soaked, or sneezed on. Probably not. You wake to the familiar weight of disappointment. It's oat day again. But then again, every day is oat day. You sit up, brush away a few crumbs and two confused beetles from your blanket. and squint into the half-lit room. The fire's been rekindled, and now sputters politely beneath the pot, sending little wisps of smoke up toward the ceiling like offerings to a soot-stained god. Someone stirs the porridge slowly, methodically, like they're stirring regret. You know the drill. 2 ladles of lukewarm gray slop, 1 chunk of turnip if you're lucky, and maybe if the gods are feeling generous, a pinch of wild garlic or crushed nettle for spice. Today, no gods are watching. Just oats. Gritty, lukewarm, and speckled with something suspiciously crunchy. You sit by the hearth with your wooden bowl, trying to find the right rhythm of chewing so the grit doesn't chip your molars. Your cousin beside you is already on her second bowl, spooning it in with the kind of detached efficiency that only comes from a lifetime of accepting this is all there is. You've eaten so much porridge by now, your dreams are starting to come in shades of beige. There's a reason nobody writes songs about medieval Scottish breakfasts. There's only so many rhymes for lump and mild choking hazard. Oh, still, it keeps you alive. Barely. It's cheap. It grows well in the harsh climate. And you can boil it, bake it, mash it, or just chew it raw if you're desperate. And desperate is sort of the baseline around here. A good harvest means slightly less hunger. A bad one means slightly more theft. Last year, a neighbor was caught sneaking into another family's barley stash. He lost 2 fingers, which seems harsh, but no one misses barley more than a hungry Scot with a knife. Mainstream historical fact: oats were a staple crop in medieval Scotland, especially in the Highlands. Unlike wheat or barley, oats thrived in the colder, wetter conditions. They were ground into meal for porridge, oat cakes, and gruel, forming the backbone of the diet for peasants and crofters alike. It was a reliable crop, which is code for everything else failed more often. While the English associated oats with horse feed, Scots proudly adopted them as fuel for warriors, workers, and everyone with a functioning jaw. You head out after the morning meal to help turn the soil in the small patch of land behind your croft. The wind immediately finds your ears and starts whistling in a way that makes you question all your life decisions. The soil is half rock and half mud. But with enough effort and swearing, you manage to work a few furrows. Your hands are blistered. Your back aches, and your knees have turned the color of bruised plums from kneeling in the muck. But you press on. Because if you don't grow something, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, you'll be too weak to fend off whoever decides your oat stash looks a little too full come winter. You pause for a break and dig into your pouch for something to nibble. It's oat cakes against. Dry. And so hard, you could use them to patch the roof. You gnaw on one slowly, trying not to dislocate your jaw. A neighbor passes and offers you a smile that's more toothless than friendly. She's chewing dried nettle wrapped in lard. You try not to stare. She offers you a bite. You politely decline. Fringe tidbit: some Highland communities flavored their porridge with seaweed or bone marrow. Seaweed added salt and vitamins, while marrow, you could get eye-toffered calories and taste. Some even used powdered dried fish or blood for protein boosts. The term warrior's breakfast had less to do with taste and more with sheer intestinal determination. As the sun passes its highest point, you help prepare the next meal spoiler. It's also oats, but this time cooked with a bit of leftover sheep broth. The result is a faintly savory slop with notes of mystery. You eat it gratefully. You've known worse. There was a week last winter when all you had was bark tea and crushed acorns. You don't talk about that week. Back inside. The smoke hangs low again. Your eyes sting. You lie down for a bit to rest your back. Watching the peat fire glow, a soft red. Someone has added dried heather to the flames. And for a moment, the room smells almost pleasant. You close your eyes and imagine roast meat, thick stew, maybe a hunk of rye bread with a smear of butter, until the fantasy is shattered by a sneeze from across the room and the unmistakable splatter of someone coughing up something unidentifiable. You don't open your eyes. You just chew another oatcake and count the hours until tomorrow's porridge. You're just finishing another chew of oatcake, your jaw officially numb when the dog outside starts barking. Not its usual lazy grumble, but a sharp, throaty alarm that sets the hairs on your neck on full alert. The cottage door creaks open and your uncle peers out, squinting into the mist that never quite lifts. He doesn't say anything, just grunts, tightens the belt on his tunic, and grabs the dirk from the wall. The old one, the blade with a chip in the spine and a handle wrapped in something that might have once been rabbit. You follow him out. Because of course you do. You can't help yourself. Curiosity in medieval Scotland isn't just dangerous, it's practically fatal, but you still can't ignore that tingle of urgency. You and your uncle step out into the yard. Eyes scanning the low fog. Nothing moves at first. Then a shape appears, lurching from the path near the Burnaman, or what's left of one, with a broken nose and a shoulder hunched like it's been shoved out of its socket. He says a name, your uncle's name. Then he spits blood into the grass and collapses. Clan business. Someone's always feuding with someone else. And this time, it's hit your doorstep. Your uncle pulls the man inside, lays him down by the fire, and starts wiping the blood away with one of your only good linen cloths. He's mumbling names now. Old ones. Ones you've only heard whispered after too much ale, or when someone starts sharpening tools that aren't for farming. Mainstream historical fact. Clan feuds in medieval Scotland were a brutal part of life. These weren't petty disagreements, they were generations-long vendettas kept alive through blood, marriage, and rumor. Some feuds lasted centuries, with rival families fighting over grazing rights, stolen cattle, or ancient insults. No one fully remembered. Justice was often personal, and revenge wasn't just expected, it was sacred. The clan system, while a source of loyalty and identity, also made life dangerously volatile. Your aunt hands your uncle a cloth soaked in bog myrtle and says something about setting traps tonight. You pretend not to hear the rest. You already know how this plays out. Someone saw someone where they shouldn't have been. Someone's sheep wandered into the wrong pasture. Someone's cousin married the wrong cousin. Next thing you know, torches are lighting up the moor, and the night's air smells like singed hair and panic. You sharpen a stick, just in case. Evening arrives, and everyone moves a little faster. The peat fire is stacked higher than usual. Not for warmth, for readiness. A hot hearth makes for a fast torch. And that's something you learn early. Outside, the fog clings to the fields like a blanket that doesn't want to be lifted. The chickens are unusually quiet. The dog doesn't leave the doorway. Your cousin places 3 stones in a row on the windowsill, muttering a charm under her breath. You're not sure if it's for protection or if she's just nervous. But no one stops her. Fringe tidbit: in the Highlands, it was common to place stones, iron, or braided grass charms in windows and thresholds to protect against violent intentions, not just supernatural ones. Some believed a feud could be spiritually deflected, or that certain chants could turn away the blade. Whether these worked or not was beside the point. People didn't do them because they were sure they did them, because not doing them meant tempting fate. That night, you don't sleep. None of you do. You lie by the hearth, half dozing with your back against the wall and your eyes on the doorway. Every creak becomes a signal, every gust of wind a warning. The dog growls once around midnight, then stops. You clutch the stick tighter. Nothing happens. Until morning, when you step outside, you find a goat's head on the path. Not yours. A message. Not subtle. Tied to the horns is a strip of plaid your uncle's pattern, but reversed. That's not an accident. It's a promise. Or a challenge. You don't know which is worse. Your uncle picks it up, examines it like he's checking a piece of meat, then tosses it into the fire. He doesn't speak for the rest of the day, just keeps sharpening his dirk. And you walk the edges of the croft, eyes scanning every tree, every hill, waiting, wondering. Because, in medieval Scotland, danger didn't come with a trumpet or a banner. It came with a knock in the dark, a knife in the ribs, and a name whispered by someone who thought they'd settled the score 5 winters ago. And now, apparently, it's your family's turn again. You don't ask questions the next morning. You know better. The goat's head was answer enough. The entire household is on edge. Even the cow, who usually chews cud, like she's in a different timeline. Today, she stares out the window like she's waiting for something. Your uncle's sharpening a blade again, which is his version of prayer. Your aunt bakes oatcakes with unusual focus. Your cousin ties a sprig of rowan to the doorway. You pretend not to notice how her hands shake. But the day doesn't start with violence. It starts with bells. Faint. Slow. Echoing up from the chapel on the far hill. It's Sunday. Again. Which means another long, wet walk through knee-high grass and sheep droppings. All to kneel in a drafty stone church beside people you barely trust with your firewood. You tee on your cloak, already heavy with yesterday's rain, and begin the trudge with the rest of the clan. Heads bowed not in piety, but to keep the wind from slapping your face raw. By the time you reach the chapel, your feet are numb and your patience thinner than the broth you had for supper. The church is small, squat, and stone cold in every sense. You duck through the narrow door and take your usual place on the back bench, behind an old man who smells like fermented turnip and wool. The air is thick with incense, damp stone, and the sharp bite of mildew. Smoke curls lazily from a single candle, as if even the flame can't be bothered to stand up straight in this weather. The priest begins in Latin. No one understands him. That's not the point. You're not here for the sermon. You're here because not going would get you noticed. And being noticed is just another way to get blamed. When someone's cow gives birth to a 2-headed calf or their oats refuse to sprout, Mainstream historical fact: the Church held deep sway over life in medieval Scotland. But the reach of Latin liturgy often didn't penetrate rural understanding. Many parishioners attended Mass out of obligation rather than comprehension. Priests were frequently among the only literate people in a village, and services could feel as remote as the Vatican itself. For the poor, religion was more often experienced through ritual, fear, and tradition than through doctrine. You kneel when others kneel, cross yourself when they do, and murmur along with words you don't fully know. The priest's voice echoes off the stone, more haunting than holy. Your knees ache. The cold seeps through the flagstones and into your bones like water into cloth. Beside you, a child sneezes directly into the back of someone's hood. No one reacts. You start counting cracks in the ceiling to stay awake. Eventually, the priest shifts from Latin to Gaelic. This part you understand, sort of. It's a warning. As always, he talks about sin, about humility, about tithing your grain, no matter how little you've got. He warns of devils with familiar faces, of women who speak to birds, of men who smile too much. Your uncle glances at you at that last bit. You're not sure if he's joking. He rarely is. Fringe tidbit: many remote churches in medieval Scotland doubled as places of judgment, disputes, land matters, and even witchcraft accusations were sometimes handled by clergy who held as much local power as the chieftains. If you were suspected of wrongdoing, you might find yourself standing before a priest rather than a court, your fate sealed by a raised eyebrow and a nod from the laird's brother. After the service, the congregation spills out into the churchyard. Everyone stands in tight clusters, pretending to be warm. You nod to a woman whose brother once tried to steal your family's sheep. She nods back like she's forgotten. She hasn't. Another neighbor offers you a sip from a flask. It tastes like burnt roots and regret. You hand it back, grateful and slightly blind in one eye. As the sun dips low, the families begin the march back home. You trudge behind your uncle, watching his shoulders stiffen each time the wind shifts. He's expecting something. So are you. Not tonight. Maybe. But soon, you reach the cottage just as the rain starts again, thin at first, then fast enough to soak through wool. You stoke the fire, set out the food turnips and oat bread again, and eat in silence. Later, you lie awake under your damp blanket, listening to the dog scratch the floor and the wind whisper nonsense through the cracks. Then, far off, a bell rings again, just once. Low, not from the church this time. And definitely not part of Mass. You sit up slowly, the scratchy blanket tangled around your ankles and your breath catching just slightly in the cold. That billet wasn't from the church. It came from the other side of the glen, where no one's supposed to be after dark. You wait. Silence. The dog by the hearth lifts its head, growls once, like it's thinking about making a point, then lies back down with a groan. You decide you imagined it, or hope you did. The fire's still glowing, though barely. You toss on a lump of peat and watch the flame cough back to life. The smoke swirls lazily overhead and makes its usual pilgrimage into your lungs. Lovely, but it's warmer near the hearth than in your pile of blankets. So you sit there, letting the flickering light pretend it's comfort. You try to go back to sleep. You try hard. But between the wind howling like it's impersonating a banshee and the lingering memory of that bell, you're wide awake. It doesn't help that the floor is moving. Not literally. But in that special way you get when your skin itches in one spot, then another, and you just know something's crawling on you. Mainstream historical fact: fleas were a constant companion in medieval homes. Especially in places where livestock shared sleeping quarters, bedding was often infested with fleas, lice, and other vermin. The damp, smoky, unwashed conditions were a dream environment for the bugs. Anyway, for you, it's a nightly lottery of bites and itches. You pull your tunic up and scratch your ribs with a defeated sigh. One of the fleas jumps onto your sleeve like it owns the place. It probably does. You flick it off and check the bedding, which yields 2 more. You're tempted to sleep outside. But it's raining sideways, and there's at least a 50% chance of being mistaken for a sheep thief and skewered by the neighbor's overly enthusiastic nephew. Instead, you resign yourself to it. You curl back up under the blanket, nose tucked into your arm, to avoid the smoke. Fleas hopping merrily across your scalp like it's market day. You try to imagine something else. Something warm. Something soft. A feather mattress. Maybe a pillow that hasn't been stuffed with leftover goat hair. A room that doesn't smell like wet wool and smoldering fungus. But Noth is medieval Scotland. And comfort is a word for poets. Eventually, you drift off for a while, only to be jolted awake when someone kicks you squarely in the back. It's your cousin, still asleep, mumbling something about stolen pigs. You roll away and nearly fall into the ash heap. The dog growls again. The fleas dance. It's a perfect harmony of misery. You manage a few more hours of fractured sleep before the rooster crows. Except you don't have a rooster, which is why you jolt awake. Heart pounding. The sound came from outside, but it was too shrill, too high. You listen. Nothing. Then footsteps, barely audible over the wind, but definitely there. Slow. Careful. Someone's circling the house. Fringe tidbit. In parts of medieval Scotland, people believed that spirits or curses could mimic animal sounds as warnings. A phantom rooster crowing at night was considered an omen, especially if no rooster lived nearby. Some swore it meant death was coming. Others said it was just the sleuath restless, dead-mocking the living. You sit up, spine rigid, and glance around. Your uncle's already awake, sitting by the door. Dirk Hunt. He nods once. You nod back. No one speaks. There's a quiet understanding. Hear words are a waste in these moments. The air feels thick, like it's holding its breath. You hear the creak of the threshold as someone or something steps onto it. Then, nothing. Your uncle stands, moves to the door, and flings it open. No one there, just mist, rolling low and fast, licking at the doorway like a warning. A bundle of dried heather lies on the threshold, fresh, tied with a red thread. That's not good. He picks it up, turns it over once, then tosses it into the fire without blinking. The flames hiss. The dog whines. Your cousin pulls the blanket over her head. And you? You sit still, ears straining for another sound. None comes. Your uncle finally speaks. They're not here yet. Yet, you don't ask what he means. You already know. Whether it's a rival clan or something older than memory, it's waiting, watching, testing the door. You scratch at another flea bite and lie back down, staring at the blackened rafters and wondering which will happen first. Sleep, or something coming through the door. When you finally do fall asleep, it's the heavy, clumsy kind of sleep that leaves you more tired than when you started. You wake with a crick in your neck, a flea bite behind your ear, and the vague memory of something whispering in your dreams. Probably just your subconscious, reminding you that survival is a full-time job around here. You sit up slowly, stretching the stiffness from your back, and try to blink the crust out of your eyes. A crow cackles from the roof. You silently accept its judgment. Outside, the mist has thinned, but still clings to the fields like an anxious guest. You pull on your damp boots still wet from yesterday because nothing ever really dries in this part of the world and step outside into the soft squelch of a highland morning. The air smells of moss, sheep, and whatever died behind the woodpile. You check the pile. It was a bird. Or something that used to be a bird. Your task today? Tending to the animals. Again, you head for the byre, ducking under low-hanging branches and dodging the jealous stares of the neighbors' chickens. Inside the byre, the goat eyes you suspiciously. The sheep bleat without enthusiasm, and the cow just sighs. Honestly, you feel the same. You shovel muck, refill water troughs, and try not to think too hard about the flies gathering on a sore near the cow's flank. Mainstream historical fact: livestock were crucial to survival in medieval Scotland. Often living under the same roof as humans, or in an attached byre, cows provided milk. Goats were valued for both milk and meat. And sheep gave wool a critical commodity in a world where cold weather was basically permanent. Losing a single animal could be disastrous for a family's economy and diet. As such, many homes were built with low walls and animal stalls right inside, both for convenience and body heat. You finish mucking out the stall and wash your hands in a nearby stream, which is about as warm as melted glacier and not much cleaner. The cold bites at your fingers. But you? Welcome. The stingent reminds you you're still alive and not yet a spirit wandering the glen, rattling chains and lamenting lost porridge. Back at the croft, your cousin's talking about omens again. She says she found a hare on the roof. No idea how it got there. Probably a cat. Possibly something else. She insists it's a bad sign. You say it's a weirder sign that anyone's checking the roof. She doesn't laugh. She never laughs when she's in one of these moods. Instead, she pulls out a pouch of herbs and starts mumbling over the hearth, throwing pinches of powder into the flames. The smoke turns blue for a moment, then back to gray. The room smells faintly of mint and mystery. You cough and wave it away. Fringe tidbit: hares were commonly linked to witches in medieval folklore, especially in Scotland and Ireland. It was believed witches could transform into hares to spy on or harm their enemies. Seeing one, especially in an unusual place, was thought to herald misfortune or death. Some people would recite entire prayers backwards upon seeing a hare, just in case it was sizing them up for some magical mischief. You sit by the fire and try to eat another oatcake. It crumbles before you can even bite it. You sigh, dip the larger chunk into your mug of broth, and pretend it tastes like beef. It doesn't. It tastes like hot water that once sat near a vegetable. Your uncle returns mid-morning. Face grim. He says nothing, just sets down a bloody bundle wrapped in cloth. No one asks. You know it's not dinner. He picks up a short-handled axe and starts sharpening it with the kind of focus that suggests he expects to use it very soon. Your aunt wipes her hands and begins hanging more rowan over the door. You feel the tension thickening like stew left too long on the fire. By mid-afternoon, it's almost quiet. Too quiet. No birds. No wind. Even the chickens seem unsure. That's when you hear it. Footsteps. Again. Not close, but many. Distant enough to pretend they aren't headed here. But you know better. Your uncle sets down the axe. Get the cattle inside, he says without turning. You move fast. You grab the halters. Call the goats by name. And try not to trip over the sheep that always walk sideways. One of them refuses to budge. You pull. It pulls back. You swear at it in 3 languages. It eventually follows, but only because the dog starts barking. Inside the croft, your cousin lights a second hearthstone and draws a symbol in the soot near the door. It looks like a spiral. Oranot. You've seen it before. On carved stones up near the old monastic ruins. The ones no one visits after dusk. Historians still argue whether symbols like these were pagan holdovers, protective charms, or just doodles from monks with too much time and too little light. Some say they're remnants of Pictish magic. Others claim they're Christian in disguise. Either way, your cousin swears by them. And, at this point, you'll take all the spirals you can get. You sit down again. The room now thick with smoke, ash, anxiety, and the faint scent of damp goat. You stare into the fire and try to ignore the hammering of your own heart, whatever's coming. It hasn't knocked yet, but it's close enough to smell. You don't remember falling asleep, but you wake up with your face pressed into a corner of the hearth. Cheek warm from the embers and shoulder damp from someone's discarded cloak. Your mouth tastes like charcoal and regret, and your jaw is sore from clenching. The room is dark again. The fire's nothing but a red smear in the ashes. The dog is gone. So is your uncle. No one says it, but everyone notices. Your cousin's eyes flick toward the door every few seconds. Your aunt kneads a lump of dough over and over again, like she's wringing out her own anxiety. Outside, the wind has changed direction. Again. That makes 3 times today. Each time it shifts. It whistles differently, like it's saying a new name each time. You pretend not to notice. The air smells. Burnt. But not like fire. More like metal and moss. You can't describe it. And you don't want to. You step outside. Breath fogging in the early morning chill. And listen. There are no birds. No insects. No distant bleating from the pastures. Just the wind and the unmistakable creak of wood. You scan the glen. Then you see it. A wooden cart. Empty. Broken. Half submerged in the marsh at the edge of the path. It wasn't there yesterday. You squint. There are footprints around it. Bare feet. Too small to be adult. Too wide to be child. They lead away from the cart and vanish into the fog. You go back inside. Mainstream historical fact. In many parts of medieval Scotland, especially the Highlands and Isles, belief in the other folk fairies, spirits, and ancient beings was not considered superstition but practical wisdom. Carts abandoned without explanation. Children speaking to invisible friends, or animals acting strange were all interpreted as signs of their presence. The border between the human world and whatever else was out there was seen as thin, especially in the gloaming hours or near old ruins. You mention the cart. Hesitantly, your cousin closes her eyes and mutters something under her breath. Your aunt pours a circle of salt around the hearth and sprinkles ash from the last Beltane fire into each corner of the room. She doesn't even ask for help. Just does it. Like making tea or patching a boot. Fringe tidbit. Ash from Beltane fires was thought to carry protective power for the rest of the year. People stored it in pouches, sprinkled it on doorsteps, or mixed it into paint to mark talismans. It wasn't just tradition, it was survival insurance. By late morning, your uncle still hasn't returned. No one says the word taken, but you all think it, and none of you touch his chair. Instead, you're sent to fetch more water from the spring alone. Of course, because that's the rule of this universe. You grip your pail and start walking. Boots squelching in the cold. Stickimud. The path twists through a grove of rowan trees, their bright red berries hanging like warning signs. You avoid looking too closely. You've heard enough stories. The spring is still. Almost too still. You dip your pail and notice something odd. No ripples. Not even when the water shifts. Like it doesn't want to move. You fill the bucket anyway and turn back. And that's when you hear the laugh. High. Clear. Not close. But not far either. It isn't a child's voice. Or an adult's. It's something in between. Echoing between trees that suddenly feel too tall and too silent. You don't run. Not because you're brave. Because you're smart enough to know that running is an invitation. You walk. Calmly. Slowly. The water sloshes in the bucket. Each step feels like walking across a frozen pond. Unsure if it'll hold. Back at the cottage, your cousin sees your face and says nothing. Just takes the pail and draws a symbol on your forehead with the leftover ash. It smells like peat and old smoke. You let her. Later, a neighbor arrives alone. Pale. Wide-eyed. He brings news. Someone saw a figure in the hills last night. Tall. Cloaked. Not walking gliding. No footprints. Just crushed grass. The figure stopped and looked toward the village. Then it raised one hand. Then vanished. Historians still argue whether sightings like this were hallucinations brought on by hunger, sleep deprivation, or naturally occurring gases in the moors. But the frequency of such accounts across centuries and geographies keeps the debate alive. Some dismiss them. Others quietly light another candle and don't ask questions. That night, no one sleeps. You all sit by the fire, watching the door, listening to the wind. Every now and then, someone shifts, but no one speaks. The dog returns just before dawn, covered in mud, limping, eyes wide. It won't go near the door. You stare at the dog. It's trembling, not the kind of nervous shaking it does during storms, but the deep, bone-deep kind, like something crawled under its skin and made a nest. It circles the hearth 3 times, as if trying to decide if fire can still be trusted, then collapses with a low groan, eyes fixed on the door, as if expecting it to open on its own. Your uncle's chair remains empty. No one mentions it, not even the dog. Outside, dawn creeps in without warmth. A dim gray smudge leaks through the window slits. You step outside, drawn by instinct more than courage. The mist hasn't lifted. If anything, it's heavier now, more like breath than fog. The air tastes like stone and old rain. You head toward the edge of the croft. Boots, squelching in mud that feels clingier than usual. When you reach the outer fence, you see it, a charm dangling from a post. Not one of yours. Not anything your family would hang. It's braided with sheep hair and human hair black. Coarse, unmistakably intentional, and it's wet. Though it hasn't rained, mainstream historical fact, hair charms were used in some parts of early medieval Scotland as both protective wards and curses. Human hair, especially when braided with animal parts or tied with bone fragments, was thought to carry power both sympathetic and otherwise. A charm like the one you're staring at could mean protection or a warning. Most didn't wait to find out which. You leave it hanging. Touching it would be a choice, and you're not making any of those today. Instead, you return inside and announce what you saw. Your aunt closes her eyes and mutters, "We're being named." You don't know what that means. But your cousin immediately begins boiling juniper and yarrow in a small pot. The smell is sharp, bitter, almost peppery. The dog sneezes and buries its head under your cloak. No one eats breakfast. No one mentions it. The sun stays behind clouds all day. You go through the motions checking fences, watching the sheep, trying to repair the roof. But the usual rhythm of life is broken. The air carries an undertone, like a voice just beyond hearing. You find yourself turning your head toward sounds that aren't there. A rustle that doesn't match the wind. A whisper when no one's near. You're not alone. Your cousin grips her rosary tighter. Your aunt carries the peat tongs like a weapon. The dog won't leave the hearth. By early evening, the neighbor boy runs into the croft, panting, eyes wild. They found him. He says between breaths, "Your uncle? You don't ask if he's alive." You already know. They found him at the edge of the loch, face down in the reeds. No wounds, no blood, no signs of struggle. Just lying there, as if he decided to take a nap in the water and forgot how to wake up. His hands were folded on his chest, and in them clutched tight was a small bundle of dried rowan, tied with red thread. You ride with the men to retrieve him. The loch is still, black as oil, no ripples, the kind of water that doesn't want to be disturbed. They carry him in silence, wrapped in wool, eyes still open. One of the older men mutters a prayer backward. You're not sure what god it's for. Fringe tidbit. Some lochs in the Highlands were believed to be gateways, not just to the underworld, but to something older places, where the veil between worlds thinned dangerously. If someone drowned there without marks, it was often said they were taken, not killed, Some believed you could leave offerings to retrieve them. Others said if they came back, they weren't the same. Your uncle's body lies in the center of the cottage now, surrounded by candles and smoke. Your aunt covers every mirror. Your cousin draws spirals again in the ashes. You place 3 coins on his chest. It's not for fair. Like in other traditions, it's for weight. To keep him still. Just in case, you sit beside him most of the night. His face looks too calm, too smooth. Like he saw something that removed all fear or replaced it with something else entirely. Historians still argue whether the widespread rituals surrounding death in rural Scotland were born from pagan roots or practical psychology. Covering mirrors, salting thresholds, burning. Certain herbsome say they were ways to cope with grief. Others say they were last-ditch efforts to keep something ancient from noticing you were now one soul short. Near dawn, you hear footsteps outside again. This time, no one pretends not to notice. You grip the peat tongs. Your cousin grips a bowl of smoldering yarrow. The dog doesn't bark, and outside, just beyond the fence, you hear something laugh. Not loudly, just enough to let you know it remembers your name. The laugh doesn't echo. It hangs in the air like mist-tin. Chilling. Impossible to pinpoint. You all freeze, as if silence might cloak you better than any charm ever could. Your aunt stares at the door with her lips moving, forming a prayer she doesn't quite finish. Your cousin tosses a handful of juniper into the fire, and it sparks wildly, casting quick, dancing shadows across the rafters. The dog whimpers, not a growl, not a bark, just a whimper. The sound an animal makes when even instinct gives up. The laugh doesn't come again. It doesn't need to. By mid-morning, the mist finally breaks. The sun peeks through like it's testing the air first. The world outside looks almost normal. Almost. The birds start chirping again, though not quite in tune. The animals move cautiously, their ears twitching at nothing in particular. You take the chance to walk down to the loch alone. Someone should. You carry a sprig of rowan in your belt and a small chunk of salt in your pocket, because no one walks empty-handed after a night like that. At the loch's edge, the reeds sway gently, as if whispering secrets to each other. The water is still. Too still. You kneel down and place the salt in the shallows. It fizzes for a second, then vanishes. No bubbles. No sound. You stand quickly and step back, far enough to pretend you didn't just offer a bribe to something you hope isn't listening. Mainstream historical fact. Offerings to water spirits were common in Scottish folklore well into the late medieval period. Coins, bread, milk, even small items of clothing were left near wells and lochs, believed to be inhabited by dangerous or capricious entities. The idea wasn't necessarily worship, it was negotiation. Stay in your world, and I'll stay in mine. Back at the croft, there's news. A group from the next village over has arrived. They're planning a cleansing. You know what that means, rituals. Chants. Maybe a visit from the one-eyed seer woman who lives near the bog and eats nothing but boiled nettles and stories. She arrives in the evening, wrapped in layers that smell like mildew and smoke. Her hair is braided with bones. Not decorations, actual bones. Probably mice. She doesn't ask permission. Just walks straight into the croft and stares at the body still lying there. Her eyes don't blink. She tilts her head, makes a sound in her throat like a frog coughing, then spits once into the fire. Everyone waits. No one breathes. Then she says, "Not taken. Not fully. Your aunt gasps. Your cousin drops the charm she was holding. You stay still. The seer circles the room, eyes scanning every surface. Something was invited. She mutters, "Not summoned? Invited. That's worse. Apparently. You don't ask why." She sets out her items, a small cup of blackened milk, a braid of dried nettles, a circle of stones arranged in a pattern that doesn't look geometric until it suddenly does. Then she hums, a low, rising drone that crawls up your spine and sets every hair on your arms standing at attention. Fringe tidbit in Highland folklore. It was believed certain women, often widows or outcast, shelled knowledge passed down outside church teachings. These spey wives were consulted in times of spiritual crisis. While the church officially condemned them, many communities quietly relied on their guidance when more official channels failed. Some were said to speak the old Tunganot Gaelic, but something older. She finishes her chant. The fire flares blue, then green, then settles into its normal orange sputter. She nods. Satisfied. He's not coming back, she says. But neither are they. Avino, you don't know who they are. You're not sure you want to. That night, your uncle is buried with 3 silver buttons sewn into his shroud, a rowan twig under his tongue, and a black stone placed beneath each foot. It's not traditional. It's just what must be done. The seer stays until the burial is complete, then vanishes before dawn. No one sees her leave. Historians still argue whether rituals like this were born from Celtic beliefs, Norse influence, or something else entirely. Some say it was a way to process trauma. Others think it was cultural memory of a time when the world felt less divided between real and unreal. Whatever the case, it worked. Or at least, things get quiet again. For a while, the mist clears for several days. The animals relax. Your aunt starts baking again. You even manage a full night's sleep without waking to mysterious noises or phantom footsteps. The fleas still bite, but somehow, that's comforting. Fleas are familiar, predictable, mundane. But then, one morning, as you gather water from the spring, you spot a figure standing across the glental, unmoving, wrapped in something that looks like wool but hangs wrong in the light. They don't approach. They don't speak. They just watch. You blink, and they're gone. You stare across the glen for a long time, heart thudding just a little faster than it should for such a quiet morning. The air seems colder now. Though the sun is out, you tell yourself it was nothing, just mist curling into a vaguely human shape. A trick of light. You even manage to half believe it until you return to the cottage and find the same figure has been seen by your cousin. She doesn't say anything, just draws another spiral in the soot near the door and tucks a stone into her boot. You do the same. The thing about fear out here is it's rarely theatrical. It doesn't scream or chase or rattle chains. It just waits, sits in the corner, makes you forget why you came into the room, replaces your reflection with something that blinks when you don't. You spend the day pretending to be busy patching a hole in the thatch roof, helping your aunt twist bundles of heather for the smoke shelf, trying to read meaning into the movement of crows overhead. None of it helps. You sleep with your back to the wall that night. It feels safer. It's not. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval Scottish homes were usually single-room dwellings, with families, animals, and possessions all crammed into the same smoky, peat-scented space. Privacy was rare. Superstition wasn't just cultural decoration, it was survival strategy. Every family had their own blend of Christian faith, folk rituals, and deeply personal lore to explain the strange, the sudden, the unexplained. The next morning, the neighbor's sheep are gone. Not dead gone. No blood. No tracks. Just empty pasture and a single hoofprint burned into the frost, like someone pressed it with hot iron. Your cousin says, "It's beginning again." Your aunt closes the shutters and leaves them closed. You all stay inside that day, pretending the world outside doesn't exist. The dog doesn't bark anymore. It just watches the chimney, as if waiting for something to come down instead of up. Around noon, you hear singing. Low, melodic, in a language you don't know. It's coming from the tree line. Your aunt grabs the tongs. Your cousin starts muttering. You sit still. The voice continues for a while, then stops mid-note like someone pulling a string tight, then letting it snap. Fringe tidbit. There were stories of the Seelie court and Unseelie court, benevolent and malevolent fairy hosts, respectively, who roamed the highlands, especially at the change of seasons. Hearing their music was considered dangerous. You weren't supposed to follow it, respond to it, or even acknowledge it. To do so might draw their attention, and their attention was rarely good. That night, the fire won't stay lit. No matter how much peat you add, the flames sputter and die, like they're being smothered from the inside. Your cousin suggests burning one of the old charms from the loft. Your aunt says no. You don't speak at all. Eventually, the fire relents and catches, casting long, slow shadows across the rafters again. You keep watch while the others sleep. You hum a song. Your mother used to sing something about rowboats and rivers and stars and pretend the sound makes a difference. Historians still argue whether lullabies from the region encoded folk memory or were just poetic nonsense to keep babies quiet. Some melodies include references to hills that walk, stars that whisper, or rivers that carry people away and return them changed. No one agrees on what they mean, but the melodies endure. You wake with ash on your face. You don't remember falling asleep. No one admits to placing it there. It's in the shape of a spiral again, drawn with a shaky hand. The dog is gone. Again, your cousin says you'll need to climb the cairn today. No reason. Just because it's time. You don't ask what that means. She wraps food in cloth and hands you a flask of boiled nettle water. You set out without saying goodbye, as if this is just another chore, like gathering, kindling, or collecting eggs. Your boots crunch on gravel, then moss, then gravel again as you ascend. The cairn is ancient, older than the village, older than the ruined church in the woods, maybe older than the language carved into the stones near the loch. You've never been to the top. No one has. Or, at least, no one admits it. But your feet know the way. Like they've done it before. The climb is steep. Silent. Birds scatter when you approach. Not flies scatter. Like they don't want to be caught near you. You reach the top just before dusk. The view should be breathtaking. But all you see is a shadow, stretched long across the glen. Your shadow, except it's pointing the wrong way. You sit. You wait. The wind picks up and brings with it a whisper. Not in words, but in tone. It sounds like breathing. Then, suddenly, everything stops. The air, the wind, even your heartbeat for a second. The cairn groans beneath you just once, and you feel a pulse through the stone, like it remembers. You don't stay long after that. On the way down, you find the dog waiting halfway down the hill. Alive. Calm. Watching. You don't question it. You just follow. The dog doesn't look tired. Or injured. Or even relieved to see you. It just turns and starts walking down the path like it expected you all along. Like the two of you made some kind of arrangement before you were born. The stones under your feet feel warmer now. But not because of sunlight. It's nearly dusk. It's that strange residual warmth old places seem to carry after something moves through them. Back at the cottage, no one says a word when you arrive. Your aunt simply gestures for you to sit while she stirs a pot of something thick and vaguely yellow. Your cousin's busy placing 7 smooth stones on the windowsill, each one marked with an X, each facing slightly west. You wonder what happens if one turns. You eat slowly. The food tastes like turnips and fear. Then you notice something. The dog is sitting with its back to the fire, staring straight at your uncle's empty chair. Not at the chair itself. Exactly, but slightly above it. You glance at your cousin. She nods once, as if to say, "Yes, we see it too." But still, no one speaks. Mainstream historical fact. Dogs were believed to be sensitive to spirits or omens in many medieval cultures. In parts of the Scottish Highlands, a dog staring at an empty space, growling without cause, or refusing to enter a room, could be interpreted as evidence of an unseen presence. Sometimes they were taken as warnings, other times as messengers. You sleep light that night. You don't dream not in the usual way. Instead, you see flashes, the cairn, the lock, a figure walking upside down on the ceiling of your mind. When you wake, your mouth is full of salt. You didn't eat anything salty before bed. You rise early and go outside, half hoping to feel normal morning chill, half expecting to find hoofprints on the doorstep again. Instead, the yard is undisturbed. Too undisturbed. You notice the birds are chirping, but it sounds off too rhythmic, like someone imitating birdsong without ever hearing a real bird. Your cousin joins you and casually remarks, "They're trying too hard today." You nod. She doesn't say who they are. You don't ask. Fringe tidbit. In some Highland tales, spirits or fair folk attempting to blend in with human life would mimic natural sounds badly. A voice too smooth. A laugh, a beat, too late. A bird that never blinks. Some stories even suggest whole villages were replaced. Their residents, never noticing, they'd become actors in someone else's dream. The villagers gather later that day to discuss the thinning, That's what they're calling it now. The sense that something's grown too close, that the skin between their world and the other one has become dangerously transparent. The old man who lives near the peat bog swears he saw his dead wife walking along the road 2 nights ago, only her eyes were glowing. The baker's daughter claims her reflection has been blinking out of sync. One child hasn't spoken since she wandered too close to the cairn. Everyone has a story, and all of them end the same way. But maybe it was just a dream. Oh. You know better. The spae wife returns that night. This time, she brings a bundle wrapped in sealskin and tied with what looks like sinew. She places it on the hearth without explanation and tells you to boil it, but not open it. The smell that rises is indescribable, like sage, meat, metal, and wet wool, all having an argument. She watches you closely as the steam curls upward. Then she says, "You've been chosen?" "Oh." You laugh, not because it's funny, because it's absurd. You, chosen. You're barely competent at mending thatch and staying out of the lock. But she doesn't smile. It saw you. She continues, on the hill. And it didn't take you. That means you're marked. Your cousin starts crying quietly. But she won't explain why. Your aunt puts her hand on your shoulder. It's the only time she's touched you since your uncle died. Historians still argue whether figures like the spae wife were real people with local authority or symbolic placeholders in oral traditions. Some say they were just the community's way of processing trauma through ritual and archetype. Others claim they truly believed themselves intermediaries between the seen and the unseen. The bundle finishes boiling. The spae wife lifts it from the pot with tongs, mutters a phrase in a language that burns your ears a little, then casts it into the fire. The flame flares bright green, then white, then nothing, just smoke and silence. She nods once. That'll hold them for a season. Oh, you want to ask hold who? What happens when the season ends? But you don't, because in this place, questions are doors. And sometimes, doors answer. You sleep that night in the loft, under the roof beams that creak like voices learning how to whisper. The dog curls at your feet. At some point, a single crow taps at the window 3 times, then vanishes into the dark. You wake to frost on your blanket and someone else's footprints beside your bed. You don't scream. You don't even flinch. You just stare at the print stamp. Narrow, bare, not muddy, not dusty, as though whoever or whatever left them had been made of morning fog. They lead from the small window across the loft, curve beside your blanket, then vanish at the ladder. You don't hear the dog breathing. You sit up slowly and see it curled nearby, unmoving, for one horrible second. You think it's dead? Then it snorts softly. Dreams of chasing something that maybe wasn't there. You don't wake the others. There's nothing they can do. What would you even say? That a presence politely walked through the loft, observed you sleeping, and left no calling card besides footprints that felt considerate? You lie back down, eyes open, watching the beam above your head. It's carved with notches from your childhood, one for each lambing season. You think about carving one more. By the time the others wake, you're already outside, walking the fields, pretending to check the boundary stones. You glance down at the fence posts. One of them has a red thread wrapped tightly around it. Just one, tied with a knot you don't recognize. You leave it there. Mainstream historical fact. In parts of medieval Scotland, red thread was used in rituals of protection or to mark territory claimed by unseen forces. Sometimes it was placed by those seeking to ward off evil. Other times, it was left by those believed to be the evil, as a sort of warning or agreement. Interfering with the thread was never advisable if you didn't place it. It wasn't yours to move. When you return to the croft, your aunt is already heating water and muttering about shifting winds and low clouds. She insists the sun's too quiet today. Your cousin says nothing, just offers you a cup of yarrow tea and sits beside you. Knees touching. That's her way of checking. If you're still you nod. You think you are? That afternoon, the village gathers again. They've invited a man from across the water, a stone-faced elder from the Isles. Wrapped in a tartan, the color of storm clouds. He's quiet for a long time after arriving. Just sits by the central fire, letting his hands hover over the flames, like he's feeling for something no one else can touch. Then he speaks. It's not a haunting. It's a remembering. Oh, the villagers stir. Someone asks what that means. He says nothing. For so long you think he won't answer. But then he does. You live too close to where the world forgot itself. Oh, and somehow, everyone understands. Fringe tidbit. The Islemen often spoke of the forgetting the idea that some places had once belonged to other things, other minds, and that those places could never quite unlearn their past. Certain hills, groves, or ruins were seen as remnants of a time before time, when the world was more memory than matter. To live near one of these places was to walk the edge of someone else's dream. He teaches you all a chant, not words. Exactly. But sounds meant to confuse listeners who weren't meant to hear them. He says the chant should be used if they come too close again. You don't ask who they are. No one ever does. That night, the chant is whispered from every hearth. Some villagers say it together, others alone. You say it with your cousin while stirring a pot of barley. The dog watches. This time, it doesn't curl up. It just sits and waits. Historians still argue whether such chants were rooted in language or simply oral talisman sounds to comfort the speaker more than repel any real danger. But records exist of similar melodies appearing across regions, centuries apart, often describing them as thin songs, the kind that felt like threads pulling at the edge of silence. Sleep comes slowly again. But this time, no footprints, no crow, just a heavy, warm stillness that settles in like a thick wool blanket. In the morning, the mist has finally lifted. The crows are back to sounding like themselves. Even the dog chases a squirrel and looks faintly embarrassed about it. You go to the cairn one last time, just to look. The path is quiet. The rocks dry beneath your feet. When you reach the top, you see something left on the central stone, a rowan twig, tied with red thread, but different this time, looped into the shape of a heart. You don't take it. You don't touch it, but you smile, just slightly, and walk back down. The smile doesn't last long. As you return from the cairn, you feel it again, that peculiar weight in the air. Like the world is waiting for a drumbeat that never comes. The path curves oddly, steeper than you remember. You blink, and for a moment, the trees feel closer together. Not kite moving, but not kite fixed either. You pick up your pace, boots scuffing against the dirt as the wind shifts once, then twice. You count each gust. 1, 2. You don't wait for the third. When you reach the croft, your cousin is outside, arms folded tight, watching the tree line. She doesn't greet you, just points. You follow her finger and see them. Stones. 3 of them. Small. Flat. Stacked perfectly one atop the other, near the doorstep. You didn't put them there. Neither did she. And you both know your aunt wouldn't leave something so precise by the front door. Mainstream historical fact in Scottish folklore. Stacked stones, particularly trios, are used as path markers, spirit traps, or invitations. They could signal sacred ground, mark a contract with an unseen force, or serve as warnings. Context mattered, and no one touched them unless they knew who made them. You step around them carefully and enter the cottage. Your aunt doesn't look up from her spindle, but she mutters, 3 stones? You'll need 3 offerings. Huh. You ask, of what? She says, of yourself. You don't ask for clarification. No one ever explains these things outright. It's one of the rules. That evening, you find yourself alone in the shed. Sorting tools. You've already sorted twice this week. You need a reason to be outside. To breathe air that isn't thick with smoke and salt and chance. The sun hangs low, a copper disc bleeding into the heather. You pause at the doorway and look west. Something moves. Not fast, not threatening, just present. A figure walking across the field. No urgency, no fear. Barefoot, head bowed. You squint. It looks like your uncle. Fringe tidbit. There are stories of the fetch in Highland Lorien apparition that appears in the form of someone familiar, usually just before or after death. Seeing your own fetch was considered an omen of death. Seeing someone else's meant they had unfinished business or were not fully gone. In some villages, people were buried once in the grave. Once in effigy, make sure their spirit didn't wander back out. The figure doesn't look up, doesn't even glance your way, just drifts into the mist, forming at the edge of the moor. You don't follow, you don't call out, but you do whisper his name. Just once. As a test. The wind picks it up, whispers it back. Slightly wrong. That night, you sleep with a braid of rowan and salt tucked into your pillow. The dog returns to your feet. It doesn't whimper. It growls, low and steady, as if keeping something at bay you're better off not knowing about. Your aunt decides it's time to close the threshold. You didn't know it was ever open. She clears a space in the center of the room, sweeps a circle of ash, and places 3 bowls inside it: milk, blackberries, and a spoonful of blood from her thumb. She doesn't wince, just holds your gaze as she presses the needle in. Historians still argue whether blood rituals in rural Scotland were remnants of pagan ceremonies or practical symbolism, emphasizing the cost of safety. Most modern interpretations shy away from the literal, but acknowledge the emotional truth that protection often comes at a price, and sometimes the price is yourself. You're told to sit in the circle? You do. Your cousin chants again the same nonsense sound pattern the elder taught her. Only now it feels more real. Less like words. More like remembering. The bowls start to tremble slightly, though no wind moves through the room. Then the blackberry juice darkens. Just the juice. The milk remains white. The blood stays red. But the berries turn blacker than black, like they're absorbing the firelight. Then they vanish. Not spilled. Not tipped over. Gone. No one says anything for a long while. Finally, your aunt stands and says, "The threshold is sealed." You don't know what that means, but you feel it, like a knot has been tied in the air around the cottage. A boundary drawn that not even the wind seems willing to cross. You sleep more soundly that night. No dreams. No footsteps. The dog snores, and in the morning, the 3 stones are gone. You don't ask who moved the stones. Everyone pretends not to notice. That's another rule. Don't speak of what disappears. The silence is like insulation. Padding between this world and whatever else might be listening. The hearth fire crackles with new confidence, and the cottage smells of rosemary and burnt oats. A strange peace settles in, not comfort exactly. More like the hush after a storm that might return. You step outside and feel the difference immediately. The air doesn't hum anymore. It no longer feels thick with the presence of something unseen. It's just wind. Honest. Cold. Scottish wind. The kind that tastes like salt and moss and doesn't whisper your name. But then, you see the tree. It wasn't there yesterday. You'd swear by it. A blackthorn, tall and gnarled, stands halfway between the croft and the glen, casting a shadow that twists east even in the morning. Its branches bristle with thorns long enough to pierce bone, and a single white ribbon flutters from one of them. Mainstream historical fact. Blackthorn trees were deeply feared and revered in Celtic folklore, seen as gateways to other realms or as markers of where the other people passed. They weren't to be cut, climbed, or touched not unless you wanted trouble. Ribbons, hair, or thread found on their branches were sometimes offerings, sometimes warnings, and often a sign you'd wandered too close to something old. Your cousin joins you, squinting at the tree. "That wasn't here yesterday," she says, confirming your suspicion. "Should we burn it?" you ask. She laughs short. Nervous. "We don't burn what isn't ours." Hem. Fringetid bit. Blackthorn trees were said to appear overnight after the death of someone marked by the folk under hill. Their presence meant the land had been altered, claimed, or remembered by something older than the village. The tree itself became a tether, part memorial, part anchor, part invitation. You decide to leave it. No one talks about it again. But every time you pass it on your way to fetch water or gather eggs, you avoid its shadow. That afternoon, the seer returns once more unannounced. As always, she has a limp this time, and her eyes are bloodshot, like she hasn't blinked in a while. She sits down without asking and declares, "It's thinning again." Your aunt?" Stirring a pot of something thick and herbal. Mutters, "Already?" The seer nods. The mark's too fresh. You realize she's looking at you. You check your hands. Nothing. You check your wrists. Your neck. Still nothing. Then your cousin gasps. There's a faint spiral, just above your left collarbone. Small. Barely visible. But definitely there. You hadn't seen it before. And you're quite sure it wasn't there yesterday. The seer pulls a chunk of raw peat from her satchel and tosses it into the fire. A greenish smoke curls upward and makes everyone cough but her. Historians still argue whether physical markings like spirals or runes were interpreted literally in medieval communities, or whether they were metaphors passed down in oral stories. There's some evidence that spiral marks were carved into stones, marking burial grounds or ancient boundaries, often in association with protective enchantments or warnings. Others argue they were simply artistic symbols, later mythologized. The seer leans close. Her breath smells like cloves and river water. It's not a curse, she whispers. But it's not a blessing either. You're remembered. That's all. And memory is dangerous. Hi. That night, they prepare a protective rite around the croft. Not inside. Around. You walk the perimeter 3 times with your cousin, laying bits of silver foil and sprigs of dried sage every few feet. The 3rd time around, the blackthorn is gone. No roots. No fallen leaves. No broken ground. Just grass. As if it was never there. As if it had simply remembered somewhere else it needed to be. You don't mention it. No one would thank you for saying it aloud. The rite ends with a long, slow chant that begins at sundown and continues past midnight. You all take turns keeping the fire alive. Feeding it peat, bones, herbs, and at one point something wrapped in cloth that none of you are supposed to look at. The flames flicker red, then gold, then briefly vanish entirely before roaring back with a sound like breath being held too long. When the last log falls into embers, the air tastes like copper. Your aunt kisses your forehead. A rare thing. Your cousin touches your arm and says, "You're still you." You nod. But you're not sure. You sleep deeply for the first time in days. No dreams. Just warmth and weight and the smell of smoke in your hair. The dog sleeps against your back, anchoring you like a rock in a river, and far, far off. Beneath the ground or above the wind, you're not sure where you think something sighs. Not unhappily, just waiting. The next morning, the sky looks wrong. Not stormy. Not dark. Just off. Like someone repainted the clouds but used slightly the wrong shade. You rub your eyes, hoping it's just the afterimage of firelight from the long ritual. But the feeling doesn't fade. The air hums with quiet energy, like the pause before thunder. Your cousin hands you bread with too much salt baked into it. "Just eat it," she says. "For luck." You chew it slowly, feeling each crystal crunch between your teeth. Outside, the land lies strangely still. The trees don't rustle. The crows don't caw. Even the midges seem to hold their breath. It reminds you of a time when you were small, hiding during a game, waiting to be found, but also hoping you wouldn't be. Mainstream historical fact. Scottish villages in the medieval era often relied on natural sign weather shifts, animal behavior, even the silence of windows, indicators of spiritual or supernatural interference. When the land went quiet, it wasn't peace. It was anticipation. Something was being decided. You spend the day helping repair a section of fencing near the western edge. Though the sheep refuse to graze there now, your cousin hums, while she works a low tune, one you've never heard but instinctively recognize. You find yourself matching her rhythm as you hammer pegs into the soil. Then, around midday, the world tips. The light sharpens. Shadows stretch unnaturally long. Even though the sun hasn't moved, the dog starts to whine. You freeze mid-step as a chill races up your spine. It's the cairn. You turn, slowly, and see a figure standing at its summit again. Not moving, not gesturing, just there. Your cousin sees it too and grips your arm hard enough to leave bruises. "It's him," she says. You ask, "Who?" But she's already gone pale. Fringe tidbit. In some Highland legends, a figure known only as the Watcher would appear at high places during periods of spiritual imbalance, described as neither living nor dead. The Watcher didn't act the observed. The belief was that if he turned to face you directly, you'd been chosen. If he looked away, you'd been spared. If he vanished, it meant the decision had already been made. You both wait. He doesn't turn. He doesn't vanish. He just watches. Then, just as suddenly, he's gone. You don't talk about it, but you both leave a piece of bread and a pinch of ash at the base of the cairn the next morning. It's not tradition. It's just something that feels necessary. That night, your aunt brings out the iron bell. You didn't even know you owned one, but she says it's from her grandmother's time used when the veil thins to the width of a breath. The bell is small, blackened with age, and rings not with a chime, but with a dry, metallic cough. She tells you to ring it if you hear your name spoken at night. That's it. Not if someone knocks. Not if the fire goes out. Not even if you see someone in the mirror that isn't you. Just when your name is spoken. You keep it beside your cot, wrapped in cloth. You fall asleep staring at it. You wake with your fingers curled around it, not remembering when you reached for it. No one said your name. Not out loud. Historians still argue whether such objects, iron bells, twisted spoons, carved stones, were protective talismans, or simply psychological comforts in a world without reliable explanation. But many agree they served a communal function, marking shared fears with shared actions. A bell ringing in the night didn't mean hysteria. It meant solidarity. In the morning, you learned something new. 3 people in the village heard the bell last night, but none of them rang it. Your cousin insists you take a walk. Clear your head. You go to the loch, skipping stones like you used to, counting the ripples. Then you see a reflection in the water that isn't yours. Not behind you. Beside you. You whip around. Nothing. You don't look at the water again. You just walk back. Eyes on the path. Repeating your name under your breath like a tether to yourself. That evening, the spae wife returns with something different. A mask. Rough hewn. Carved from rowan. Its features, strangely, neutrales too wide. Mouth too calm. She hands it to you without instruction. When it comes, she says, "Don't wear your face." You nod. You don't ask what it is, because you think you already know. You spend the whole next day with the mask beside you. You don't wear it. Not yet. It sits on the table while you patch the thatch roof, rests on the windowsill while you eat, lies next to your cot when you nap, watching you with those unblinking, rounded eyes. It's not heavy, but it feels dense in your hand, like it's storing more than wood. Your cousin avoids looking directly at it. The dog growls when it gets too close. That evening, as twilight folds itself neatly over the glen like a worn wool blanket, you feel it. A shift, like something sighed through the stones under your feet. Your aunt stops mid-chop while preparing turnips and mutters, "Tonight," then continues like nothing happened. The fire burns low. The shadows grow long. You place the mask on your lap as the wind picks up, howling in strange syllables around the eaves. And then, just past midnight, it begins. Your name. Spoken once. Softly. From just beyond the door, you freeze. Not a knock. Not a groan. Your name? Drawn out slowly, as if tasted. It sounds like your aunt, but you check the fire. She's there, asleep in her chair. Your cousin, too, is curled on the floor. You reach for the bell, but something stops you. The mask. You pick it up and place it on your face. It fits. Too well. Mainstream historical fact. In parts of Highland tradition, masks weren't used theatrically, but ritually worn during ceremonies to confuse spirits, to protect the wearer from being recognized by forces that hunted identity. The logic was simple. If they don't know your face, they can't find your soul. The second time your name is spoken, it comes from the window. A different voice. Someone you once knew. Maybe a cousin who drowned, or a friend who vanished into the hills. Their voice is warm, familiar, kind, the sort of voice that makes you want to believe. You don't move. The mask hums slightly against your cheek. Then comes the knock. 3 taps. Rhythmic. Confident. You don't answer. Your cousin stirs and opens one eye. She sees you in the mask and just nods once. Slow and solemn. She doesn't look at the door. Fringe tidbit. Highland legends speak of night callers, beings who come when the threshold is thinnest, mimicking voices of loved ones to lure the living out. If you open the door, they wouldn't drag you away. No. They'd simply ask you to step outside, and then you'd be gone. Not vanished. Not dead. Just remembered by something else. The fire gutters. The room grows colder. Not like wind chill, but like the cold you feel before a fever internal. Bone deep. Your cousin rises silently, places a rowan branch across the doorframe, then sits back down and closes her eyes. The dog is nowhere to be seen. You sit in silence, breathing through the mask's carved mouth. The knock doesn't come again. Instead, you hear footsteps retreating, slowly, as if disappointed, as if waiting for another chance. Historians still argue whether the legends of the night callers were personifications of winter deaths, loneliness, or isolation in remote settlements. Hearing a familiar voice at night was more than superstition. It was an invitation to grief. But others believed the stories carried psychological truth, a warning not to trust comfort too easily in a world where comfort was rarely free. Eventually, the fire strengthens. The shadows retreat. You remove the mask and place it back on the table. Your cousin whispers, "You didn't answer." And you nod. Neither of you sleep. The dog doesn't return until dawn, covered in dew, eyes rimmed with pale yellow. It stares at you for a long time before curling back under the hearth. Later, the spaewife arrives once more. She sees the mask on the table and says nothing, just runs her hand above it like she's checking for heat. "It worked," she mutters, almost to herself. Then she smiles, but it's a tired smile. A smile like someone who knows this isn't over. And neither do you. That morning, the mist doesn't burn off. It clings to the hills like gauze, thick and low, muffling every footstep, every cough, every bleating sheep in the far pasture. You carry the mask in a satchel, now can't bring yourself to leave it behind. It feels like a key, or a lifeline, or maybe just a threat you haven't deciphered yet. The dog still won't meet your eyes. You head to the village, unsure why, just walking, checking, feeling. The path curves past the standing stones, 5 of them, tall and streaked with lichen. You've passed them 1,000 times, but now they feel different, heavier, wrong-footed. You place your palm on one and flinch. It's vibrating. Not much, just enough to let you know it's not asleep. Mainstream historical fact: Scotland is littered with Neolithic stone circles and megaliths, many of which remained part of folklore well into the medieval era. Villagers often attributed unusual sounds, dreams, or weather to their presence. Some called them listening stones. Others, anchors. They weren't feared exactly, but never ignored. Near the inn, you overhear whispers. Not gossip news. One of the shepherd boys is missing. Disappeared 2 nights ago. Last seen chasing a lamb toward the river. Never came back. No footprints. No wool. Just a smear of white thread on a fence post. You remember the red thread from before. Color means something out here. You just don't know what. At the edge of the market, the elder from the Western Isles sits silently near a dying fire pit, boiling something thick and gray in a copper pot. He watches the flames like they might blink. When he sees you, he simply says, "It's begun." You ask what? He replies, "The remembering." Fringe tidbit. Highland lore often speaks of time not as a line, but a loophole that tightens around places, people, and stories that haven't been resolved. Some events don't, and they echo. And those echoes eventually demand attention. The idea of remembering wasn't just personality, was geographic. Entire hills could remember. That night, if you help your aunt place protective charms along the Crofts Corners, bundles of heather, crushed eggshells, and braids of salt-soaked flax, your cousin burns nettles and chants in low bursts. It feels futile, but you all do it anyway. It's the doing that matters. And then, sometime after midnight, the bells start ringing. Not the small one by your bed, not the iron one. These are older, duller, deep. They come from the trees, from the river. From beneath, they aren't loud. Exactly. But they are undeniable. A single toll. Repeated. Slow. Impossibly distant, and yet so near that your chest vibrates with each pulse. You all gather around the hearth. Eyes wide. No one speaks. The spae wife stands in the doorway. You didn't even hear her arrive. She says, "They found a way through." You ask? Through what? She smiles sadly. Through the places we forgot to fear. Historians still argue whether medieval communities in the Highlands genuinely believed in incursions from the other side, or whether these stories were allegories for natural disasters, invaders, or psychological collapse. Still, the rituals persisted. Fear, after all, is fertile soil for tradition. The next day, 3 more families leave the village without explanation. Their crofts are left swept and clean. Fires still warm in the hearths. Beds made. It's like they just stepped outside and kept walking. No farewells. Just absence. You walk to the cairn again. The stones have changed. They've shifted. Just slightly, but enough that you notice. The topmost one now bears a symbol spiral within spiral. You reach for it. Then stop. You remember what the spae wife said about touching what isn't yours. So instead, you sit and listen. At first, there's nothing. Then, music. Soft. Distant. Flute. Maybe. Or pipe. Carried by the mist. Not cheerful. Not sad. Just old. And beneath it, another sound like the creak of ropes. Or breath, moving through hollow wood. You place the mask beside you. You don't put it on. Not yet, but you know you'll need it again. Because whatever's coming, it knows your name. The music fades by morning, but the unease lingers like smoke that never quite clears. The sky holds that brittle gray stillness that makes even birds think twice about flying. You can feel the land bracing itself like the hills are holding their breath. People don't greet each other anymore. They nod. Barely. Conversations shrink into murmurs. And no one lingers on paths longer than they must. You help mend a broken fence. But your hands move on. Your eyes keep darting to the tree line. The forest edge is too quiet. You notice things missing. A familiar crow. A footprint near the well that vanishes mid-stride. A door that swings open slowly when there's no wind at all. That afternoon, the elder calls a gathering. Everyone attends, even those who usually avoid crowds. I speak slowly, voice low and flat, as if afraid to raise it too high. The village must choose. He says, "We stay, or we scatter." No one laughs, not even the smith, who used to chuckle at everything. Your aunt grips your wrist. Your cousin doesn't blink. Someone asks, "What happens if you stay?" The elder looks at the cairn behind him and says, "Then we remember, whether we want to or not." Mainstream historical fact. During the medieval period, many small highland communities would periodically abandon or relocate their settlements in response to famine, plague, or unexplained events. These abandonments were often unrecorded, leaving behind villages perfectly intact, hearths swept clean, with no signs of violence, only a collective decision to leave a memory behind. You think of the 3 families that vanished, the fresh ashes still in their hearths, the unbroken dishes still on their tables. What did they remember that the rest of you haven't yet? The elder pulls a cloth bundle from beneath his cloak and reveals a curved horn etched with spirals and bind runes, bound in tarnished silver. He says it was used once before, when the veil last thinned. He doesn't say what it summons, only that it keeps the balance, and it can only be blown by the one the land has chosen. Everyone turns to look at you. You try to object. You swear. You stammer. You laugh. Weakly. The horn is handed to you anyway. You don't feel chosen. You feel cold. Fringe tidbit. Spiral. Marked horns appear in Highland legend as tools of calling, not necessarily to summon things, but to signal readiness, to acknowledge to the land, to the spirits, to the unseen watchers, that the village remembers its place. In some versions of the stories, blowing the horn invites protection. In others, it simply marks the beginning of something that cannot be undone. That night, they paint your forehead with ash and time. You wear the mask. The horn hangs from a woven belt at your hip. The fire burns blue and low. The wind refuses to enter the cottage, pressing against the walls like an outsider. At midnight, you walk alone to the cairn. The path opens for you too easily. No rustling, no resistance. You feel like the only moving thing in the entire glen. The moon is distant and dull. You climb slowly, stones damp beneath your boots, breath clouding your vision. At the summit, you find the spiral-marked stone again. A small offering has been placed beside it, a braid of black hair, tied with red wool. You kneel, you raise the horn, and you wait. Historians still argue whether the blowing of ceremonial horns in isolated communities was symbolic or functional. Were they calls to action? To war? To gods? Or were they rituals of closure, designed to draw a circle around a memory so it wouldn't leak into the future? No one can agree. No one wants to. You put the horn to your lips. The sound is low, long, and not quite yours. It seems to rise from the earth itself, pass through you, and echo up into the clouds. It carries weight, more than air, more than noise. When it fades, the silence that follows is absolute. Then, footsteps. Behind you. You don't turn. You place the horn beside the stone. You rise, and you walk back down the hill. Behind you, the wind starts again. The clouds thin. A single crow calls. The trees begin to sway, and something follows you but not closely. Like it's content to be remembered again, you return to the village in silence, carrying nothing but the weight of what just began. No one meets you at the edge of the crofts. No cheers. No questions. But you see movement in the window curtains twitch. Doors edge. Open an inch. Just enough to check if the world has ended or not. It hasn't. But it's shifted. You can feel it beneath your feet. The way you feel the sea swell beneath a boat even before the storm. The dog meets you first. Not bounding. Not wagging. Just sitting in the middle of the path. Head tilted slightly. As if to ask, "Did it hear you?" You nod once. It trots beside you the rest of the way. Quiet and alert. When you step into the cottage, your aunt is already preparing bread. Your cousin is braiding fresh nettle into a charm. No one asks what happened at the cairn. But they all move differently now, lighter. Like they're no longer holding their breath, but slower. Like they're expecting something to still arrive. You set the mask on the shelf. The spiral on your collarbone itches. You don't scratch it. Mainstream historical fact. In late medieval Scotland, periods of ritualized quiet often followed community-wide ceremonies, especially in rural places tied to ancient traditions. These silent days weren't just about recovery, they were believed to help seal the rite, allowing what was stirred to settle again. You sleep for 12 hours straight. No dreams. Just that warm, blanket-heavy kind of rest you haven't felt since the first crow landed on your windowsill. When you wake, the dog is curled beside you again. Breathing steadily, you open your eyes to pale sun filtering through the roof slats. And for the first time in days, the light feels soft, not sharp, not foreign. Just daylight. Over the next few days, things begin to settle. The mist lifts more often. The sheep graze closer to the forest again. A traveling peddler returns and says the Western Pass is open the first time in months. He doesn't mention any spirits, any missing children, any strange trees that vanish. Just asks if anyone wants more nails or flour. The village buys everything. You help rebuild a section of the outer wall that collapsed weeks ago. No one mentions the horn. No one asks where it is now. But you notice the cairn has a new stone knot carved. Not etched. Just placed carefully at the summit. You recognize its smooth round shape. It's from the riverbank. You didn't put it there. But someone or something did. Fringe tidbit. In some Highland oral traditions, the end of a supernatural event was marked not with celebration, but with anonymity. No names spoken. No stories shared. The community simply resumed, allowing the memory to fade into landscape. That way, nothing was invited back. Your cousin hums a different tune, now gentler, slower. She says she doesn't remember learning it, just woke with it in her head. Your aunt still won't talk about the night of the mask, but she does add more garlic and thyme to everything. As though flavor alone can ward off whatever lingers, you keep the mask hidden, wrapped in cloth, stored beneath the hearth. Not to bury it, not to forget it, just in case. Historians still argue whether any of these village rituals, masking, horn blowing, stone stacking, were part of a consistent spiritual system or just regional responses to fear. Some say they were fragments of druidic rites. Others that they evolved independently out of necessity. But everyone agrees on one thing: they weren't meaningless. Because nothing that endures this long ever is. And you? You endure. You walk the boundaries now, not just to check the fences, but to feel the ground. You know which trees were always here, and which ones still don't belong. You know how to tell when the mist carries footsteps instead of fog. You've learned how to listen for your name, and how to ignore it when necessary. You don't fear remembering anymore. You know now, remembering is power. Forgetting is what lets the cracks widen, so you whisper the chants now and then. Not out of fear, but habit. And when the wind shifts just right, you think you hear the horn echo softly, like a far-off lullaby, something remembered. Something still watching, but not unkindly. Just waiting. So now, as the last echoes of our tale dissolve like mist off the moors, let yourself settle. You've walked the heather-choked paths, worn the carved mask, stood before silent stones, and remembered what others tried to forget. But the night is quiet now. The fire is low. The wind that once whispered your name now only hums through the rafters like a lullaby too old to trace. Breathe slowly. Deeper this time. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. Feel the way the weight of the blanket around you anchors you back into your world, far from the wilds of highland shadows and forgotten cairns. Whatever followed you in this story has stayed where it belongs, behind the veil, where myths curl up like sleeping hounds and old gods mind their distance. Even the dog beside your cot has stopped growling. He's dreaming again. Pause, twitching, chasing squirrels instead of ghosts. The cottage is warm. The kettle simmers low. And outside, the moon slips behind a hill like it, too, has grown tired of watching. You're safe now. No spirals on your skin. No footsteps at the door. Just you. A flicker of candlelight. And the slow, comforting hush of things returning to normal. Or at least something close to it. Close your eyes. Let your breath move like fog. Let go of what you remembered. The night holds you. And whatever listens in the dark, it listens gently now. Sweet dreams.